Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the standoff, which began on Monday with the closing of borders between Qatar and many of its neighbors, led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. With us to talk about it from New York, Firas Maksad, director of the Arabia Foundation. From New York, Antoine Hauff, who's the senior research scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. I want to welcome back as well Rula Jibril, who teaches at the American University of Rome. And here in the studio, Ardavan Amir Aslani, the author of Saudi Arabia from Influence to Decadence. We were mentioning the contradictory remarks from, on the one hand, the U.S. president, and on the other hand, the Pentagon. Ardavan, which way is Washington going with this?
The entire planet today is accustomed to the erratic behavior of Donald Trump. The institutions.
So we should listen to the Pentagon, not to the president?
I think that's what we should do, and that's what's happening. Because the Pentagon knows better that without the base in Qatar, without the 10,000 U.S. servicemen stationed there, without the dozens of jet fighters flying out of Qatar to bomb ISIS in Iraq and Syria, there is no war on terror, as they call it. So no matter what Trump says, the reality of the matter prevails, and that's a fact. One other issue that is important to remember to explain the cause of this entire story, aside from the Muslim Brotherhood financing by Qatar, is Iran. I mean, today the Saudis are freaking out when they look north, when they look west, when they look east. Now, when they look south, they see what they perceive as an Iranian threat in Iraq with the Shia movement, in Syria with Iran's defense of the Assad regime, in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and now today with the Houthis in Yemen.
And there's plenty of blame to go around. Both sides have
as a matter of a war which they call the decisive storm, and the only thing decisive about it is the 30,000 dead civilians that it has entailed so far, and Sana is in the hands of the Houthis still. They're no longer seeing the crescent of the Shia power as they see it. They're seeing today what is the reality for them, which is a full moon of Shia power. This has caused them to freak out. And in their mind, Qatar is an element that they don't control, that has always looked upon Iran as an entity that should be regarded with respect. As a matter of fact, Sheikh Al-Tamim, fake news or not, but that's how the Saudis thought it was a reality, called the Iranian president, newly elected, congratulating him on his elections, and basically saying that Iran is a significant regional power that has to be respected and dealt with. This reality, in light of the war that the Saudis are leading against the Yemeni population, is such that they believe that Qatar no longer is in the agenda. And by the way, who are the 6 countries that you mentioned? In the GCC, you have Kuwait. Kuwait has not, cut off its relations with Qatar.
They're trying to do a mediation.
They haven't, by the way. And who, the government in Libya? It's not even the government in Libya. It's some kind of terrorist movement in the eastern part of Libya. Who else? Maldives?
Antoine Hauff, let me ask you, because here out of Paris, we're getting reactions this Tuesday. The French President Emmanuel Macron, who's been on the telephone to the Emir of Qatar. He's also been speaking with the Turkish president. The French, who, by the way, sell Rafale jets to both sides in this argument. Egypt getting Rafale jets that were funded as well by Saudi Arabia. It's a tricky one for Paris as well. In fact, Antoine, there was reports in the newspaper this morning wondering what will be the future of Paris's football club, Paris Saint-Germain, which is owned by the Qataris.
Right. Well, I think, there's a lot of passion in this debate, and you could hear it in the previous comments by my co-panelists. But I think we have to take a step back and cool down a bit. There's a long history of tension between Qatar and other GCC members, particularly the Saudis. This is not the first time, there's a little bit of tension between those countries, which is, I think, partly why the markets are so calm today. They're used to this. And I think we have to see it out and see how it goes. I wouldn't necessarily, expect an escalation. I think we could see de-escalation very, very soon. Both the Saudis and the Qataris, as well as others in the region, are very important to French and American military efforts in the region, as well as the global economy. Everybody has an interest in cooling things down. And it's not the first time either that we see some daylight between the statements from Washington and the tweets from the president of the U.S. So I think we have to cool down a bit and see how it goes.
And what do you think of that Kuwaiti mediation?
Well, that's the role that Kuwait has taken place. One of the questions this raises perhaps is the future and the viability of the GCC as an organization. It's never been a very high-performing organization. GCC countries are very interesting, each one in its own right. But as a group, the GCC is not working particularly well, either economically, diplomatically, politically, or in any way. So the Kuwaitis have had the role of being the cool head, the negotiator, the in-between, the go-between between the various more hot-headed countries. And I think it's true to character is playing that role today. Oman has been sidelined, has been disengaged for a long time. And the tension between the Saudis and the Qataris have a long history.
The tension between the Saudis and the Qataris have a long history. Stuck in the middle is another country, Turkey, whose ruling AK party is part of the same international Muslim Brotherhood as Qatar, and which has gone to great pains of late to mend fences with Saudi Arabia.
We're saddened by the current situation and will make every effort necessary to normalise relations. Any country can have difficulties with others, but it's essential for all sides to talk.
Rula Jibril, where does this argument leave countries like Turkey, and what do you think when you listen to Antoine Hauff saying perhaps we're all just overreacting slightly?
This is the same argument I heard from Democrats and probably most Americans when Donald Trump was running. I wrote an article in the Washington Post predicting he will win, and he did. Most people were underestimating what the rebellion among voters. This is exactly what I'm seeing now. I think that we're not overreacting. We're seeing tendencies by some GCC countries to crush every pro-democracy movement, but also every criticism. Any country that stands up and not only criticize, try to divert and have different views. For example, open views towards Iran, or even have different views towards human rights violations in Egypt. I mean, we have a tyrant in Egypt who killed thousands of people, the biggest massacre in daylight. The only country that criticized that was Qatar, while Saudi Arabia was clapping, funding basically every lobbyist in Washington, D.C. to do two things. Basically to write nice things about them and to divert policies. So whatever counterterrorism laws, for example, there's one law that was passed recently which allows American citizens to sue.
My question was, you heard Antoine Hauff saying that the markets are staying calm for the time being. Are we overreacting when it comes to this row?
Yeah,
is this something that...
The market stayed calm also when Donald Trump was elected. But the world is not calm. And people, I think, have serious nightmares when this guy starts tweeting and opening his mouth. However, he's emboldening the worst tyrants and thugs around the world. Basically, he does not understand that what was put in place, that mechanism that President Obama put in place, where he made a deal with Iran to force them to de-escalate and basically give up their potential nuclear capability in exchange for the region to open up because we need them to stabilize Iraq and elsewhere. The GCC decided to launch a war against the Iranians in Yemen, in Syria, and basically now against their own allies and own friends, which is Qatar. So the way they're going about it is like George W. Bush. Either you are with us or against us, regardless the arguments. It's about basically armaments and full-blown war on whoever does not agree with their policies.
All right, let's get other reactions. Firas Maksad, your thoughts on, first of all, the fact that there is this difference of opinion between the Pentagon and the White House?
I think that's the case. We've seen Donald Trump tweeting in the middle of the night about whatever comes to his mind, and that is a sense that has been reinforced by the election results. Most people think he would not win the presidency. He did his own thing. He reached out directly to the American people. Twitter was a big part of that, and he's convinced that this is working for him. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not taking the good advice of his national security establishment. We've seen, General McMaster, his national security advisor, and General James Mattis, his defense minister, play a key role, particularly as it comes to Middle Eastern issues. So I think the president is catering to two audiences here, one being his electoral base, the second being the world at large and taking the advice of his national security staff.
But the Pentagon is saying that their operations in Qatar continue as normal.
And I believe that's the case. Now, there have been calls to relocate the Al Udeid base away from Qatar to somewhere else in the region. I don't think that's in the cards in the near term. I think there's quite a bit of a reliance on that, but that's also a possibility in the medium to long term should things escalate with Qatar. Now, I've been listening in patiently, and a lot of this debate has devolved into mudslinging against Saudi Arabia and against other countries. Let's be clear here. None of these countries that we're discussing in the regions are model democracies. Saudi Arabia is true to form, does not pretend to be, and does not pretend to be advocating on behalf of popular movement and interfering in the affairs of other states the way that Qatar has. Also, I think what is an important distinction to make here is that while Saudi Arabia in the past has had its troubles with extremism, let's face it, I mean, the West together with Saudi Arabia throughout the Cold War supported Muslim radicals in order to push back against communism. That's a reality. It would be a mistake for any sober analyst to deny that. But blowback came in 1990 with Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and the first target of Osama bin Laden was the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia before 9/11, a decade before 9/11. Since then, the Saudi government has been pushing back, but has been treading very carefully. Because anybody who talks about Saudi Arabia today as a monolith, the way that ISIS talks about the West, and we all know that the West is not a monolith, Paris is not Washington. Anybody who talks of Saudi Arabia as a monolith is mistaken, is playing to the masses because it's popular on Twitter and elsewhere. Saudi Arabia today has a conservative and uber-conservative Wahhabi clergy establishment. The royal family has to be very careful in bringing about reforms and change. It's been well on its path in doing so. I mean, allowing women to drive is a very active debate today in Saudi Arabia. The new leadership, the new leadership is talking about new venues for the young, for reform. Twitter is open. Social media is available for people to air their views. So to cast any of these countries as model democracies would be a mistake.
Are paid directly by Saudi Arabia or their foundation or their organization? Because, I mean, what are we talking about here? Can we please be honest with our audience, at least here in Europe? If some of our guests are here, their foundation, organization are working directly for Saudi Arabia or funded by Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, here we are basically being hypocritical and basically misinforming our audience. Saudi Arabia is the chief financier of extremists. This is according to the State Department in 2015, 2016. This is according to every security apparatus around the world.
I want to move this conversation. I've heard from both sides.
Saudi Arabia as being locked in a battle with Al-Qaeda.
All right, we've heard from both sides of this argument. I would like at this moment, Firas Maksad, Rula Jibril, I would like at this moment, I'd like at this moment, please, to move the debate forward, just because we're running short, very short on time, and just look at what's going to happen next, especially for neighboring countries. We heard earlier the Turkish foreign minister calling for all sides to sit down at the table, and that's one of the problems. You know, we're wondering what's going to happen next. What are the consequences for countries like Turkey? What are the consequences for Israel and the occupied territories? What are the consequences for Libya of this row? Is this going to be over in a couple of days with some Kuwaiti mediation, or are we headed towards something that could really disrupt the whole region?
It's going to take a longer time. It's going to take a longer time. But at the end of the day, a couple of months from now, maybe a year, we're still going to call the story, as of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. When you look at the situation in Qatar, we're talking about a frontier being shut down with Saudi Arabia, but no blockade has been pronounced. Iran, Turkey, and Russia are running to replace whoever used to supply food and construction material to Qatar. This won't be a problem. Maybe there's a rush for supermarkets today, but that's not going to prevent other countries such as Iran and Turkey from providing whatever Qatar needs. Oil and gas will flow as usual, and Qatar will become more adamant in defending what it believes is a legitimate fight against secular dictatorships or unaccountable royals pushing their weight around town. That's what Qatar believes. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's a fight amongst two versions of extreme Islam.
It
is a version of
Qatar
defending the Islamic Muslim Brotherhood, and it's important because the Saudis put Marshal Sisi, who is the ex-Egyptian defense attaché in Cairo, in Riyadh, to overthrow in a coup the only democratically elected government in Egypt's history. And before that, you had Qataris defending Morsi before he was toppled. So you're looking at a situation where two heavyweights pushing their weight around. The Saudis are scared of the Muslim Brotherhood because it is an existential threat to them, because it basically brings democracy and the consent of the majority to be governed by the rulers, which the Saudis are not willing to accept.
Right. There are a lot of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate, and they're just as impassioned as we've heard from our panelists. This one saying Qatar was a double agent in war on terror. So the argument really going both ways on this one. What are the consequences for a nation like Turkey, which has been trying to mend fences with Saudi Arabia?
The Turkey will survive, and Turkey will be able to enjoy a respectful relationship with both parties. But at the end of the day, this is a huge embarrassment for Donald Trump. I mean, after this grotesque trip that he made over there, we're standing next to some of the worst dictators on the planet. He criticized Iran, which was witnessing its own elections. You know, it was obnoxious. And today, you're seeing Trump end up in a ridiculous situation whereby what he presented as a successful initiative, whereby he unified the entire Sunni world, is crumbling like a chateau.
Antoine Half, you were saying to us at the outset here that we shouldn't overreact, we shouldn't panic. Nonetheless, this row is erupting on the day when U.S.-backed forces are starting their push towards Raqqa in Syria. Are you sure there won't be consequences for places like Syria, for places like Yemen, for places like Libya?
Well, listen, it's obvious that the country, the region has problems. There's tensions, there's existential threats, economically, politically, in many different ways. And there's no doubt those problems will not go away instantly. But I think this spat over the last couple of days, in a way, is kind of the policy equivalent of a presidential tweet. We've been used to flare-ups in rhetoric from the presidency in the U.S., and this, to me, I think, was partly triggered by the visit of President Trump in the region, and resonates with the tone of Trump's tweets. But I don't think anybody has any interest really in escalating the situation further.
What happens if there is a military move by Saudi Arabia against Qatar? Which, I mean, they did it in Bahrain. So what would happen?
The invitation of the government.
At the invitation of the government, in that case, yes.
Well, I don't think they're going to be invited in
the U.S. Air Base.
I would like to say something, interject in this. One of the biggest lobbyists in Washington, D.C., 3 days ago tweeted against the Emir of Qatar, and they're paid millions of dollars by the Saudi. And this is what he tweeted. He said, the Emir of Qatar, you're doing what Morsi did. Remember, Morsi is in jail. You might end up like him. What he was talking about, basically, he was calling for a coup against the Emir of Qatar and against Qatar, led by the Saudis and the Emiratis. I think the Saudis and the Emiratis, as we speak, they are evaluating the possibilities to intervene in some kind of way. They're talking about annexation. If you go on social media, already some people are talking about annexation, occupation, and other things. But they're waiting for the world reaction. If the world reaction is the reaction of Donald Trump, then Qatar, we might see Qatar as a province of Saudi Arabia and any other things. But if the world reaction is a strong reaction against that move, then that might stop them. But in this moment, as I said, chaos is an opportunity for these basically ruthless rulers who are willing to commit war crimes in Yemen and elsewhere, but they demand that Qatar does not invite basically normalizing relationship with Iran and elsewhere.
Ardavan Amir Aslani.
I'm sure that the Saudis, as it was mentioned, are somewhere trying to plot a coup in Qatar. That is for certain.
You're sure?
Well, obviously, we'll look at the entire scenario that they're deploying. But that being said, can they actually do it? The answer is going to be no. Can they annex Qatar? The answer is going to be no, because you have on the other side of the Persian Gulf, Iran watching. And Iran is not going to allow Qatar be swallowed by anyone in town. It's not going to happen. And don't forget, the Qataris are sharing the largest existing gas field in the world with Iran. And do you think the Iranians will authorize Saudi Arabia to invade another sovereign country and take over all the assets and end up as a partner with Iran? That's something that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
There's a U.S. base in Udeid in Qatar that is head of CENTCOM. It's the United States that holds the ultimate card as to what happens militarily if we go down that route, not Iran, with respect to everybody, and not even Saudi Arabia or any of the other countries involved. That's why the tweet by Donald Trump is so interesting, and then the comment subsequently by his Secretary of Defense is equally interesting. Listen, we don't need to get ahead of ourselves. Hyperbole and talking about invasions and military conflicts might make for good TV. The reality is that none of us here is able to see the future. We are political analysts and we don't see the future. I think all countries have an interest in avoiding an open conflict, but a line in the sand, so to speak, has been drawn. After the Donald Trump visit to Saudi Arabia, the message is that you are either on the side of pushing back against militant forces, be it Sunnis or Shias, or you are fueling this conflict. It's very clear that Qatar has been playing both sides of this conflict. I don't want to get into who's a democracy, who's not. Qatar is surely not a democracy, and Saudi Arabia is not either. But this is the message. This is why we're here today.
Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis they're all playing double games. But what makes good TV for all our audience, go check who we work for, and if Saudis or the Emiratis are paying the foundation, we are affiliated with. Right. I can assure you that I work with American universities and I'm
more
not
than
paid
happy
by
to
any of
disclose
these
that
countries.
information and put you to rest.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but I want to thank you, Rula, for joining us from Rome. I want to thank as well Firas Maksad in Washington, Antoine Hauf in New York,
pleasure.
Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François.
Boy, we sure covered those Donald Trump tweets.
Well, they do tend to get out there and get a certain amount of retweeting. He's been...
Every time there's a story like this, I'm thinking it's a different world, isn't it, nowadays?
Well, certainly the echo chamber provided by social media creates a huge space for disinformation, for noise, for hysteria, and facts often get lost along the way. I think that's for sure. And certainly Donald Trump's Twitter reaction to what's happening in Qatar has got a lot of noise surrounding it. So there you have the actual message itself, which of course you've been talking about in the show. So good to see the Saudi Arabia visit paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism. Others pointing out that, well, his tone, his Twitter tone, his tone generally has changed since that meeting in May within Qatar. We are friends. We've been friends now for a long time, and our relationship is extremely good. That was what he said then. So clearly the tweeting has changed. Overlooked by Donald Trump in this Twitter storm is the fact that Qatar is the HQ of the US Central Command. So clearly it's a bit more complex a picture than those tweets might suggest, which kind of come down to binary stuff. And the Pentagon again
refusing to comment on the president's tweets.
Right. I mean, I think it's probably more prudent in some respects. Photos of long lines, empty shelves at Carrefour grocery stores in Qatar. This is the impact on everyday life for Qataris. 40% of the food supply comes by road via Saudi. I think all you need to do is really look at a map and you understand the extent to which Qatar is reliant on the surrounding countries. It's very... Sure. Very much reliant. This shows too how in airspace the knock-on effect is being felt with surrounding countries banning Qatar Airways and other airlines from using their airspace, so they're being forced to go through Iran and Turkey. Elsewhere, we have just various people expressing frustration, François, whether or not it's on the money or accurate in terms of geopolitical analysis is another thing, but this is an Australian-based imam saying, just deploring what he sees as a failure to get on and just in the region. What else do we have? More in Qatar today. The Emir of Kuwait So a lot of people talking about the mediation of Kuwait, and this particular tweet lauding that, saying that the Emir of Kuwait is seen as smart and well respected. So perhaps that's one source of hope. Lots of comments as well about the Turkish reaction. This one, you have reactions like this on Twitter. They don't really say that much, but this is perhaps more interesting. In almonitor.com, they got speaking to a Turkish source with access to the country's senior leadership, according to this article, asking not to be identified, but they see parallels between former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi's ouster and what is happening to Qatar right now. They see it as part of a concerted campaign orchestrated by the US and Israel. This is the opinion being expressed here, against the Muslim Brotherhood and its allies with whom they feel an ideological affinity. And they're connecting the dots as well with the July 15th coup. That headline there speaks of paranoia. So I suppose up to to what extent it is paranoia, I don't know, but that's one Turkish source being cited by Al Monitor.
It certainly has Turkey and the whole region, places like Libya as well on tenterhooks, and Yemen, not to mention it. James Creedon, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.